Turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 4. Now, I'm determined tonight to show that chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 are literally what we would say in writing a screenplay or a script. It's a plot point. It's a complete turning point in the message that the book of Revelation presents. So the only way we can see that is to review again chapter 1, verse 19, where Jesus gives a command to the Apostle John that would indicate the outline of the book. Now look at chapter 1, verse 19 first. Jesus is speaking personally and directly to John the Apostle. Write therefore the things which you have seen. All right, I looked that up more intensively in the original Greek. Grapsonon eido. It's the word eidon is the word for what you have seen. And I looked it up as it is used in this context. And this is what the most authoritative Greek lexicon had to say. It means to experience something by seeing it. Do you get that? To experience something by actually seeing it. So this adds to the argument that God showed me a long time ago, in 1973, when I wrote There's a New World Coming, which was my first attempt at writing a book on the book of Revelation. It means that he was to write only about the things that he had seen in such a way he actually experienced it, which means he had to be on the scene. He had to be an eyewitness. And as I've said before, and this is not something that I'm trying to spook you with or to go to Hangar 51 or something like that. Time is a creation of God. Time and space is a creation of God. And so God is able to propel someone in time up to the future. That is no problem for him. And that is the key to understanding anything about the book of Revelation. Because over and over again, John keeps saying that he looked and he saw and he heard. If you read the book of Revelation, you know that's something that's repeated over and over again. And he says that because Jesus told him 3 times in the first chapter he was to write only about what he saw. And it means, and the word is eidon in the Greek, E-I-D-O-N. That's the root word, which means to experience something by seeing it. And so he is to write only about the things that he actually on the scene saw and experienced. Now, that is the first key. Then he says, and once again, here's the word K-A-I, kai in Greek. This word, according to the context, can mean one of 2 things. It can mean and, or it can mean even. In this case, in the context, it should mean even. He is to write about the things that he saw and experienced, even the things which are. Now, that talks about, in God's outline of history, the things which are the age of God's history that John had just entered. It's called the church age, because there's 7 ages God divides history into. And so when he says, even the things which are, he is talking about the things that are in this present age where the church is dominant in God's plan for the world. Okay? Now, I just taught a series on God's outline of history before I started the book of Revelation. And we talked about those different ages, how they started, how they ended, and so forth. So I won't recoup all of that, but there are charts there. We have tapes and CDs on all of that if you want to get into more detail. But when he says, even the things which are, he is talking about the age in which we live. And we've just gone through chapters 2 and 3, where we see the church age was divided into 7 different stages. We are in the last of the 7 stages, the age of Laodicea. Now, it's about to end. And then he says, and the things which shall take place after these things, that is, after the things that are going on now, the church age, he is then to write about the things which shall happen after the church age. The church age will come to a close before the next stage of God's history is opened. And the word after these things is 2 Greek words, metatauta. And I said last week how important those words are. Metatauta, after these things. So there we have basically the outline of the book. It's divided into 2 parts. When he says, write about the things which you have seen, that's chapters 1, 2, and 3. But with chapter 4, let's turn there now. Chapter 4, verse 1, we have the plot point. There's where things go future in God's plan, where it says, after these things. Now, any student of the Bible can look at that and say, wait a minute, I read that in chapter 1, verse 19. This must be the place where things change. After these things, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you what must take place. Meta tauta, after these things. There's the change. So it means after the church is taken out. And the church I'm speaking of here is not some building. It's not some organization or denomination. I'm speaking of it in the true biblical sense. The church is composed of every believer in Jesus Christ. He doesn't really care about your brand. People ask me, what am I? And as I've said before, I'm sort of a Catholic-Episcopalitarian. And it's a strange creature, but it's in there. Because it really doesn't matter. What really matters is if you've come to a personal faith that Jesus Christ died for every sin you'll ever commit and purchased a pardon for you, and he holds it out in grace as a gift. You can't pay for it, you can't earn it, you can't deserve it, you can only receive it as a gift. For by grace we have been saved through faith, and that not of ourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. So, this is the plot point where the church goes extraterrestrial. And that's the focus of what I want to talk about tonight. He goes on to say in verse 2, Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. And the word translated immediate, it means, it's eutheos, E-U-theta-E-O-S, eutheos. This is a word, and I looked this up and I was excited. I was really excited to see what the best lexicons say about it. It was a word that was used of rescue at sea. And it means an instant rescue from mortal danger. Isn't that a wonderful word? An instant rescue from mortal danger. And that's what he means when he says immediately. He was instantly rescued from mortal danger. Immediately I was in the Spirit. And behold, the throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. In other words, one moment he was on the earth. He was on the penal island of Patmos. And he was a prisoner of Rome. He was sent there to die. They sent this old man there. He was probably about 85 when they sent him there. And they expected him to die. They didn't want to execute him because they didn't want to make him a martyr. So they figured if he just died out on this penal island, people would forget him. So they sent him to this penal island on Patmos, where they only sent the worst criminals. They said, well, they'll take care of him. Well, lo and behold, within a few weeks, he had led a bunch of the worst of them to Christ. And they became his bodyguards. And they looked out for him. And more of those violent criminals became believers in Jesus Christ. That's where he was when he wrote this book, and God time traveled him to see some of the things that are in our immediate future. So he says immediately. Now look, what is the first thing he sees? He says he's on the earth, and he says immediately I was in the Spirit and I was in heaven. And the first thing he sees is the throne of God and God the Father sitting on it. That's exciting, isn't it? You better get excited, because I think a bunch of you are going to be part of this. Some of you are going to be shocked, and you're going to be up there, and you're going to be surprised and say, oh my God. And he said, that's right, child. Now, I want to show you some parallels between what is said here in some verses about this extraordinary event. Theologians have randomly called it the rapture, because that comes out of the Latin version of the Bible. Rapturo, a Latin word, not a Greek word. And the original word, the New Testament, were Greek. And the original word for us being caught up to meet Christ in the air is harpazo, which was a word for pickpockets. And it meant to snatch something with stealth. And so I want you to see this. We are going to be snatched out of the world instantaneously by stealth. In other words, the world's not going to know what happened in a nanosecond. But let's look at some of the verses. I want you to see some of these because they're quite exciting. Now, here's one that most people never relate to this event. By the way, I don't call this event the rapture. I call it the great snatch. Okay, here we go for the great snatch. Turn to John. John chapter 11, beginning with verse 25. And I want you to think about what you're reading with me, okay? John 11:25. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, even shall he live. As it says in the New American Standard, he who believes in me shall live even if he dies. Okay? Now, verse 26 is the one to look at carefully. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Now, isn't something strange about that verse? You can't believe after you're dead, can you? No. He says, he who believes in me, though he dies, yet shall he live. In other words, he'll be brought back in resurrection.